How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask that titular question. Because when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
This week, Parker invents the next exclusive invite-only online social experience, and I'm seeing here that the project title is Letterboxd 2 Letterboxd Rides Again. And my shares in the Better Than Citizen Kane stock gets diluted down to 0.03%? Goodness! But before we dive into that, we simply must dive into David Fincher's 2010 opus, The Social Network. The Social Network, Parker.
Drop the.
Wow, he really should have followed... Sorkin should have followed his own advice.
Should have.
Sean Parker's advice. Justin Timberlake's advice?
Justin Timberlake's advice.
This is The Social Network. This is a popular movie. This is a well-liked movie. Critically and just publicly, I would say. Publicly. Critics aren't part of the public, as we know. Parker, when did you first see The Social Network, if I may ask? Before I explain why I've brought it, I think it's pretty obvious why I brought it here. But when did you first see it?
I am fairly certain I didn't get to it till college. I know for a fact I didn't watch it, like, at its contemporary release, you know? It was one of those movies that, like, I was aware of, but, like, I was too busy dusting off the clay tablets of film history to, like, really be worried about, like, well, these are the award contenders for contemporary time. Like, you know, it was like, well, I'm busy over here with my stuff, so I'll catch up to this stuff later, you know? So I feel like I...
from now.
Yeah, exactly. I must have watched it either freshman or sophomore year of college, like 2015, 2016, something like that. I think I watched it for the first time.
Nice.
What about you?
Man, I really entered this, gonna ask you that question, and I didn't even think about it for me. I mean, it has to have been in the last 5 or 6 years I saw it for the first time. You know what? I'm gonna pull up my Letterboxd diary really
He's
quick.
taking a look. He's taking a look, folks.
Just to see. Okay,
just
everybody?
to find out and see.
Calm down. I know this makes for a really thrilling listening
See,
experience.
it's very interesting because my my Letterboxd usage just happened to line up with the beginning of the decade. Like, I started in 2020. So that's as far back as my... Yeah, okay.
Yeah, same.
Nice.
And then I went back and I have movie tickets, so then I went back and... Whatever, we don't have to litigate how I use Letterboxd. I watched this for the first time in January of 2020. Literally the start of the decade.
Wow.
And I've seen it 3 times. I would have thought I'd seen it more than that. But this is a movie that sticks with you, I feel. I watched this in January of 2020, and I'm a fan. I like this movie.
Yeah.
The reason I brought this is, I think, for the same reason we bring a lot of the films we bring to this show, which is this is a Guy Fawkes movie.
Yeah, Guy Fawkes movie.
In a sense. Because there's never really, like, a peak moment for this version of Zuckerberg, is there? There's never, like, the highs of Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
In the sense that we are... And we'll get into that. Are we supposed to like him in this movie? But I brought this because, in a lot of ways, it is the 2010s, the 21st century take on a Kane figure. Basically, right? I mean...
Yeah, I can see that.
Zuckerberg is someone who... I mean, he starts at a lower place than Kane does as far as, like, morals and likability. The whole thing of Kane is that he starts out and he's like, yeah. And then
altruistic.
Altruistic, and then that's what I meant by yeah. Is that not clear?
Yeah, it's the distinct difference between yeah and yeah.
Yeah.
That's the trajectory of Citizen Kane.
And that's his arc. As we know, that's his arc.
Yeah.
And is that how you teach film history courses?
That's exactly right.
For the new generation is just going. So his arc's kind of like a to like a. Yeah.
No, I explain to people that all, the 7 universal plot structures are all just a variation on it's so over, we're so back. And the differences are just like how you chart that, that's how I teach.
Yes. Yes. And The Social Network also follows that model in a sense of it's so over.
Absolutely. We're so back.
And then it's we're so back, and then it ends with it's so over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we're going to talk about. I have thoughts on the ending.
Okay.
I have very distinct thoughts on the ending.
Well, I think also Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher have very distinct thoughts on the ending. And the film at large. This is something that I'm really excited to talk about. Is I watched the behind-the-scenes documentary.
Nice.
It's feature length, 90 minutes. And something that became immediately clear to me about this movie, Parker, is that... So basically, they did like 3 weeks of rehearsals leading up to filming. And it wasn't what a typical rehearsal would be, which is like making sure they're getting the dialogue right or the blocking right or anything like that. What it was like Fincher and Sorkin. In the footage we see, it's like Fincher and Sorkin and Garfield and Eisenberg sitting around. And it's basically just Fincher and Sorkin going line by line, and Fincher being like, I don't think we need that. I think that's a little too cutesy. And Aaron Sorkin being like, but, and Fincher's like, we don't need it. We don't need that. Which is a great process to watch. But there's this moment that I took note of. It's The Social Network. People have seen The Social Network. If you haven't seen The Social Network, watch it.
Go watch The Social Network.
But there's this moment where Sorkin is talking and he says, do we run the risk of people saying, oh, am I supposed to feel empathy for this 21-year-old with a couple $1 million in his pocket because people are treating him poorly? Because I can feel empathy for a guy who got wronged by a girl. And he says that, and Fincher cuts him off and says, but he didn't get wronged by a girl. And I think that's...
I've seen that clip.
I think that's the tension between these two guys. Is it seems like... I don't know if Sorkin necessarily likes Zuckerberg because he writes him in a way that he is unlikable to an extent. But I think he respects him. I think Sorkin views Zuckerberg as someone who has seen an opportunity and taken advantage of it. And I think he has like almost a capitalistic respect for Zuckerberg of like, you turned the system on its head. Hats off to you, sir. Sure. Fincher, to me, almost feels like he understands the complexities that Sorkin wrote into the thing that Sorkin himself is kind of battling with, almost.
Yeah.
Do you get that sense at all?
Totally. Like,
Okay.
it is... The stuff I have seen of them talking about is very interesting, like, their views on the subject matter and the source material, and is surprisingly, like, they're both very vocally at odds with each other, which is an odd pairing for writer-director, you know, like, usually it's, you know, it's Lucas and Spielberg, you know, singularity of vision going forward together, and, like, this is just very interesting. Any of the behind-the-scenes stuff I've seen of this is not combative, but, like, very lines drawn in the sand of, like, no, this is how I view this character.
It's a lot of, like, compromise and kind of tug of war of like, okay, well, I think this, and it's like, but we wrote it like this, and kind of pulling it until they land somewhere where they go, okay.
Yeah.
And to Sorkin's credit, there are scenes, there are like the moments that are recorded where he goes like, yeah, okay, yeah, absolutely. Like he seeds things. He would have had to.
Sure.
He understands what the director's function is. The documentary also ends with what feels kind of like a foreboding note of its own, which is Fincher kind of being like, hey, I'm going to go home. You can shoot the last shot of the movie, which is like one shot of two guys at a laptop during the face mash sequence. He's like, you can shoot that. I'm just going to go home. And Sorkin kind of doesn't believe him. And then the AD is like, okay, we can help you however you need us to. And Sorkin is like, oh. And it's interesting. And I say
Fincher,
it's
what have
foreboding.
you done?
I say it's foreboding only for the fact that Sorkin's scripts are never quite as good when he's directing.
Absolutely.
Like, the things that come after this, like, Steve Jobs is great. But, like, from what I've... And that he didn't direct that, Danny Boyle did.
Yeah.
And then you have, like, the Lucille Ball movie.
Yeah,
You
Trial
have,
in Chicago 7.
which I've heard are just not as great. And I do think from the behind the scenes here, it seems like what Sorkin really needs is somebody there to be like... You know,
That's too cutesy.
In a sense that, yeah, it's too cutesy, right? Because... And, you know, I mean...
Like, I remember there
but...
is something that they were talking about, and you'll have to let me know if this isn't in the documentary, just like some interview one of them gave, but they're talking about like arguing what Mark is drinking while he's blogging.
Yes.
And like that is a big point of contention between the two of them. And he's like, well, like thematically he should be drinking this. He's like, you can't get drunk on that. Like, what are you talking about?
And also, would a college student be preparing his own drink? Like, all of these things. And Fincher knows, because the real Zuckerberg had made these blog posts, he's like, we know what he was drinking.
Yeah.
And the fact that he did all of this while drinking that thing, like, that's kind of, So
right.
It is interesting to kind of see how this came together, of like, oh, it really is kind of like a testament to what a director kind of is there to do, as far as like enacting their vision of something. Even if you love a screenplay, you are kind of the vessel through which it passes to become a movie, and I think that's very interesting. I mean, that's really interesting. So you have takes on the ending.
I do.
That we can get to at the end?
Yeah, let's get to the end. Let's get to the end. We have to build this thing first.
But how does this work for you? How does this make you feel? What do you like the most about this movie before we talk about it?
I think it is I mean, it's Fincher. It's directed within an inch of its life in a great way. Like, it feels very exacting. For material that, like, doesn't need it necessarily. Like, it's strange to have, like, a Zodiac 7 engine inside of the Facebook movie. I don't think that would have been people's first, like, choice off the cuff. Especially because, like, even something comparable, looking at, Steve Jobs, written by the same guy, directed by somebody else, like, even that doesn't have, like, this feels like a thriller at times in the way that it is paced and edited together. In a way that Jobs isn't. And so I think that's a testament to, like, Fincher's strengths of coming from a very specific kind of genre background and infusing that into the biopic, which is intriguing because, like, biopic is just as useless a genre qualifier as drama is. Like, it's just too viscous, like you can't nail something down from that. And the best biopics are the ones that just use biopic as the springboard and then pick a genre, Right. And I think this is a thriller, which I think works well for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really interesting because I do think this movie kind of sets up. There's a Social Network kind of movie that gets made now, of like, it can be as close to it as like Steve Jobs or BlackBerry, which came out a few years ago. But then you have, like, Air, and you have kind of the movie of, like, and how did this get made?
Yeah.
And I think something that makes The Social Network stand out so much is that it has such a specific genre that it is going for within the biopic thing. It's not just saying, well, we're going to show you how it happened. And, like, I haven't seen Air. I know you liked Air when you saw it.
It's fun.
I've heard BlackBerry's very good. And I really like Steve Jobs a lot.
It's really good.
And that's another movie that is assisted by the fact that its director and it's like the way that it is structured is doing something very specific. It's this lack of specificity that makes biopics a real sludge to get through sometimes. And I do think that a huge strength of this film is The Social Network, rather is the genre that it's working within, is the thriller aspect of it.
Totally.
And to that point, Reznor and Ross's score here makes you feel like you're gonna die a little bit.
It's crazy because, like, it's so interesting. You bring up this central argument of, like, well, I can have empathy for a guy who was wronged by a girl. It's like, he wasn't wronged by a girl. That didn't happen. And you can feel so strong. Like, I think that was my Letterboxd review. Like, Aaron Sorkin is trying to make this guy a human being. And I think he, like, is kind of successful at it. And we'll get into that at the end. But freaking the score does the heavy lifting for convincing you Mark Zuckerberg is a human being. That score, like you said, just makes you ache.
Yeah. And specifically for me, okay, we're going to talk about the first little bit of the movie really quick. Because obviously the first scene is spectacular. I mean, it's Sorkin operating at highest function, and it is a delight to watch every single time. Rooney Mara. Just got a big
So
old crush
good.
on Rooney Mara.
So
Just a big
good.
fan of her. And that scene is so great.
Mm-hmm.
And you're having fun with it, even though it's like, wow, this guy kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And then he's going home, and then Dread the song starts playing. It's just Dread as a song, as like a score is just playing, and you're like, okay, the vibes are different now. Like you're like, why is it simultaneously like someone is about to die, and also I feel so lonely now, and like I'm seeing such a lonely space.
Totally.
Even though it's
like
a full college campus, we're cutting to a party happening, but it's this score that you're just like, it's so isolating, and you have this sense of doom.
Yeah.
It's almost like, if I may pose this really quickly before your point, Parker, is this social networking, social media apps evoked through score?
Yeah,
it kind
I can
of
see
feels.
that.
I don't know. It embodies that specific like sense of like doom and loneliness and melancholia. I don't know. That's how I feel about it. What were you gonna say?
No, I think you make a really strong point there. And mine was just kind of going hand in hand with that. It feels like Eisenberg's performance is so guarded. He is so incapable of connecting to the world around him or expressing emotion. And even like when he is devastated by something, it's not shown in the performance. It feels like the score is the cheat code into his internal world of like, you know, he kind of, his physical mannerisms when Erica leaves is that he's a little jittery. He like tries to pick up his drink, he puts it back down, and kind of sits for a minute, and then he gets up and leaves, right? But the music is telling us that this isn't a minor inconvenience. This devastated him. Like, this dude is falling apart inside. But everything about him, he's like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm going to code. I'm going to do this. I'm going to vlog. I'm never going to let anybody in. But, like, the music is letting us into, oh, this dude's heartbroken by this. This dude is so upset right now.
Yeah. So, if I can ask then, what do you think of Eisenberg's performance as Zuckerberg then? Do you think that the guardedness doesn't work? I know that you... A thing with Kane is that you're like, I don't feel like there's an interiority to him because the movie is keeping us at a distance from him. That's the whole story there. Do you like what Fincher and Eisenberg are doing with Zuckerberg here? Setting aside like the Sorkin writing, because I know that plays more into a larger point, but do you think Zuckerberg's performance is working? Do you think how he was directed is working?
I think so. Like, it's one of those things of, if I am taking Eisenberg's fabrication of Zuckerberg, you know, this character who is not the real person.
No.
I think there's a very like conceited effort to try and make the ending land and have a moment of empathy for this guy.
Oh.
And I think he lands there, you know. I think he gets to the point of like, he has enough flashes of humanity in his performance that I think work really well. I specifically like his delivery of like, you didn't have to be so hard on him. He's like, it's fine. He's like, Sean, you didn't have to be so hard on him. You know, like there are moments of a human being under his disaffected affectation that like do work for me and like make me lock in a little bit more. What about you?
Interesting. I just don't think that this movie... Maybe it's just with time, and I want to talk about how this is aged before we dive into the summary.
Sure.
And how watching it now is very different from how people would have watched it in 2010, or even 3 or 4 years after it came out. I think there's a huge shift around 2015, 2016, where I think this movie changes, which is interesting. Yeah. But for me, I don't even really view the movie as necessarily even asking me to empathize with Mark Zuckerberg all that much. I think it asks me to understand him. But I think that Sorkin is probably trying to get me to empathize for him.
Sure.
But in action, what Fincher is making and how Eisenberg is playing it, I don't feel obliged to empathize for him, to feel bad for him. And I think, And I think that's where the ending is for me. And
I can totally see that. I think the one thing that pushes the scale for me, it's literally just like if you took one line out, I think I'd agree with you wholeheartedly.
Is it
I
Rashida
think
Jones?
I think it is like you're not actually an asshole. You're just trying so hard to pretend to be one. And that's the thing that I think the movie is trying to give him a get out of jail free card.
And I agree. However, if I may, and this is fully how I interact with this movie and why this is 5 stars for me, because it was 4.5 stars for a similar reason. That's Rashida Jones's character extending that to Mark Zuckerberg. I think what I like to put the emphasis on is you are trying so hard to be. Which is, I don't think it's necessarily... And again, I think that you're right. I think that's how Sorkin intends it. Yeah. But watching it now, I really like the interpretation of, obviously Rashida Jones is saying, like, you're not an asshole. But I like that the second half of that is, you are trying so hard to be an asshole.
Yeah.
And it's still condemning him. And especially for me, I think that Baby You're a Rich Man being the needle drop is not an empathetic song. It is not.
No.
It feels like it is playfully poking at Zuckerberg in that moment of like, how does it feel to be one of the beautiful people? Right? Like, you've made it this far. How does it feel? Is kind of the sense that I get from that.
Sure.
And so I think if that song wasn't there for me, if it didn't feel like him refreshing that, felt more like you're stuck in your own misery because you're trying to be an asshole.
Right.
Is kind of that's how it works for me. But I think
can totally
you're right.
see that. No, I think it makes a lot of sense.
I think that you're right that Sorkin wrote it with the intention of saying, you're not an asshole, Mark. You're just trying to be.
And like I fully agree with the needle drop. I fully agree with the refreshing the page. Like, that feels like Fincher like resting the reins back and be like, we're ending this movie on my terms.
Exactly.
You know?
And I think that's why I let that line from Rashida
Jones
Jones
I think
slide,
that's interesting.
Because it's a character within the film saying it, and the film doesn't end with that line. It ends with a slight twist moment of but
that
he's
makes a lot of
still
sense.
trying to be an asshole. And I think that's why it works for me.
I agree. I think you present a very strong argument for sure, and I could see that, and I'm glad it works for you. It's still, and we'll get into some of the other stuff. There's a few things that still catch for me, but like overall, coming back to the original question, I think Eisenberg's doing a really good job. It kind of sucks that I think he's starting to get out of it now, but unfortunately, what happens when you are a very young actor who delivers such a iconic performance as this, like, I think he just got typecast in this for a decade, and he's just now coming out of it, you know?
Yeah,
like, the reason he's Lex Luthor is because of this movie. And like, just be Mark Zuckerberg again.
And yet, in that movie, it seems that he recognized he couldn't just do Mark Zuckerberg again, so he lands somewhere a whole lot weirder. Even though, like, again, the idea of casting him in that role is, like, it makes so much sense that Lex Luthor would be Mark Zuckerberg. And then it feels like in that movie, Jesse Eisenberg is going, I'm not Mark Zuckerberg. It's not his fault. I think he is actively trying to work against it, but it was a decade of watching him have to fight the good fight against this typecast. Exactly, and selecting projects that kind of, it's kind of what, like, Daniel Radcliffe and Robert Pattinson had to do as well, of, like, young guy gets stuck in this one role, and kind of, I feel like those, like, all three of them kind of are like, I'm going to pick very strange things, or if I'm in a mainstream thing, I'm going to give a very strange performance to just distance myself as much as I can from this idea of who I am. Totally. I think even recently Eisenberg was like, I don't want to be associated with Mark Zuckerberg. Stop tying me to him.
I don't want this, please.
It's also really interesting how many times in the behind the scenes documentary he's like says like Zuckerberg, and he goes, I don't know him, this is the character I was given. And it just feels like, all right, good job, Jesse. Let's see, any other things from the documentary I want to say? 3 weeks of rehearsal. Eisenberg has like nothing but great things to say about working with Fincher, especially on that first opening scene. He's like, I love this. He's like, this is great. He's like, I just got to, like, really bite into this, and just, like, we stayed with it for so long. He's like, I got to explore every nook and cranny of this. And then he was like, and then the rest of the movie was kind of like, oh, I don't get to do that with every scene. And it's like, yeah, sorry. But it's funny to see him be like, I loved how many takes we got to do, because then it just takes the pressure off of me. It just seems like he's such like an anxious and particular performer that I'm kind of shocked that he hasn't. I guess Fincher's projects just haven't lined up with him since, but
sure.
Seems like he'd like to work with him again at some point. I also thought it was interesting that Eisenberg said, yes, I've seen everything there is to watch and seen every photo of him, but that all seems to go away when I'm filming because I'm focused on the scene, how I'm going to set my jaw, etc. And I thought that was just like an interesting reveal of how much he did go into this to look into it, and then kind of was like, it's just going to come out how it does when I'm shooting it. Let's see. Oh yeah, and then just Kevin Spacey jump scare. Kevin Spacey, the producer on this, and he has like 2 talking heads of the documentary, and I was like, oh,
get out of here.
Yeah, go shoot. And this is the question I do want to ask. Maybe I'll save it for after. Maybe let's do a summary.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
And then there's this question that I want to ask about how this movie has aged and how it would be different if they made a movie about Facebook now. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, basic strokes. We've got the framing device, which I wanted to ask you. What do you think of the framing device? How do you like it?
I really like it. Every time I watch this, I go, oh, right, I forget, like, how quick the setups are for the multiple depositions that we're having. But I think it works. I'm surprised that it works every time for me.
Yeah.
Like, I always go, oh, wait, and then I go, no, it's fine, it's working.
Yeah.
But just, like, there's, like, the introduction to the Winklevoss deposition is so quick. It's, like, one line that's cut from the other one, and we stay in that and in, like, the 2003, 2004 timeline before we get Zuckerberg confirming, I'm in 2 lawsuits right now.
Yeah.
But I never find it confusing. What about you?
No, I agree. I think it keeps its momentum very well. I have some thoughts about it as we get further into the movie, but like as it stands, I think it works really well, and I think it catches you up to speed fairly quickly. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew Garfield as Eduardo Severin,
great. Just kills it every time. Like he's good in anything.
He's crushing it. I mean, it might just be Andrew Garfield as a person feels like he's constantly. It just feels like you naturally have empathy for Andrew Garfield.
Totally.
Like, he's just got such
like he just looks like a puppy dog half the time.
Yeah,
like he just looks so wounded.
Yeah,
you know?
He really does. He's really good in this.
Yeah.
Okay, face mash sequence. I think it's Reznor and Ross having a lot of fun. As he's like building everything. I think cutting between that and the party is a really fun way to show how quickly Zuckerberg is able to change the entirety of social culture.
Totally.
And that's kind of feels like what that's doing here is like cutting between him building Face Mash and having this Harvard, exclusive club party. And then by the end of him creating the website, all the boys are going into a different room to do this website thing. And then we see how quickly that sweeps across the campus. Obviously, I'm sure that's not how it happened in real life, but it's very effective of like showing how quickly the internet can change how we communicate with each other and what we do at parties, right?
Totally. I think it is very interesting, and I like the juxtaposition between those two of like it immediately sets for you that like the internet at this time is the great social leveler. Like him sitting in his room doing this with his roommates being a loser at his computer is the equivalent to a party at the Phoenix Club. Like that's how he gets in. So I think it's a good visual comparison of that idea. To your point, and I think we'll just kind of sprinkle this in as we go, like of how would this movie be different now versus when it was made. I think this movie, and it's part of my like half-star ding among some other things, the most we get about like how this actually affects people is there is a shot of a girl going, that's my roommate. And then one other girl being like, this is disgusting, it's pathetic. And then all the rest of the montage is like the boys being boys and the music having a great time. And like, it feels like if this were made today, there would be a lot more focus on like the emotional fallout of the women who are involved with all of this, instead of being like a quick little footnote and we move on.
I mean, we do get that girl passing the note to him in class that says "you dick."
Sure. Yep. And that and you know what? And feminism was saved right there.
No, that's an interesting point. I hadn't really fully considered that. Mainly because that I think that would require this to be. And that's okay. Let's just talk about it right now, because I do think if this movie was made now, it would be less about Zuckerberg and it would go more exterior. It would be
totally.
Let's see how it impacts people, because that's what people are interested in. Is how have I been impacted by Facebook? But I think this is made early enough that it's like Facebook is kind of new and innocent as far as I can tell. Like it's been around for like 6 years at this point. But,
totally.
I mean, 2 of those, it was exclusive to school. So it's like 4 years of Facebook. I feel like people are still pretty, like, mostly positive about it. It's
totally.
right as Twitter is kind of taking flight. It's right as Instagram is showing up. Like, Facebook is still the king of social media here. Social networking,
totally.
even.
And in like, to that extent, it feels like... And something that makes this movie a little bit harder watch now is that it's interesting because, and you I'm interested to know your thoughts after watching the documentary and knowing kind of the impetus behind all of this. But like, just from an outside perspective looking in, it feels like the script wants to make, like, Sorkin wants to make Zuckerberg a human being and will make up stuff about him to get us to empathize. And it feels like the filmmaking, and I don't know if this is Fincher by extension, but at least the filmmaking kind of goes out of its way for a lot of it to make Mark cool, to make what he's doing cool, to glamorize it, to make it flashy, make it sexy.
And yet I think at the time it kind of was, because it's the flattening of the social hierarchy. It is this guy changed everything. Yeah. And I think that Sorkin specifically is like, I think Sorkin's angle on this is, well, and Fincher's a little bit too, because I have a massive quote I can't wait to drop on the episode. But like, I think they are framing it as nerds rule, like now it's the nerds' time to rule. I will say that I think what the movie is doing is showing us, again, for me, if we go with my take that I don't think this movie ever genuinely asks me to empathize for Mark Zuckerberg, genuinely, I think it's showing me him transition from being someone who could have friends to someone who cannot at all. And like, if through that lens, for me, I feel like what the movie is showing is this is how it felt to be Mark Zuckerberg and Eduardo Saverin in this moment. It did feel cool. It did feel sexy. They were doing all these things. This is the only thing I'm going to pull from the Blank Check podcast, which I'm a big fan of. I listen to often. I re-listened to the episode just to make sure I wasn't going to like steal their takes. But there is one thing I'm gonna reference, which is in that episode they talk about the casting of Justin Timberlake as Sean Parker. The studio wanted Jonah Hill, who's probably a little bit closer to what Sean Parker who he really is and kind of what he looks like. But Griffin, one of the hosts of Blank Check, makes a point of Zuckerberg and Severin are already the movie star versions of their characters. They are the movie star versions of nerds. Yeah. Therefore, for Sean Parker to have impact in the movie, to feel like, whoa, this guy's like legit, he's already like skyrocketed, they need someone who feels even bigger than a movie star, and so they get a pop star to do it, and I think that really works.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think that Timberlake's casting really works in that way, and I think that's what it is for me, is like, definitely now if they made this, they probably wouldn't be like, he's going to be cool, because Zuckerberg is now kind of a villain. He's considered a villain. Yeah. But at this time, again, it's 2010. I feel that the general narrative is, this is a guy who switched things up. And what did it feel like to be him? And I think this movie, in both senses, shows us what it was like to be him. Of the loneliness of being an asshole, and also like the fame and kind of sexiness of being the guy who founds the next big thing.
Totally.
At age 21, you know, I think it is. That's how I could
totally see that. I think that makes a
from
lot
as
of
well.
sense.
I think
yeah,
you're
and
right.
I'm just talking about like specifically like how it would be different now, and that seems to be a big point. And like the other one along those lines is like Rashida Jones' line of like, you know, 2,200 hits. Like if that was made today, that's not what she would be asking. She'd be like,
No.
"You did that to women?" Like that.
Yes.
Again, but like it's one of those things
That's
of
a
like
great
that.
point.
It feels like this whole opening sequence is the thesis statement of like this being made in 2010 of like, okay, we're gonna point out that this was a shitty thing to do, but we're gonna focus more because as a society we're willing to more focus on 22,000 hits though. I mean, that's crazy.
Absolutely.
And
I think
that's
right.
I think that's like the distinction between like a movie made in 2025 versus 2010 is that this is what society is actually interested in examining,
now.
lauding versus now, you know?
Specifically like Hollywood as well.
Totally.
Right? Of like nowadays Hollywood would feel obliged to be like, and it hurt women.
Right.
And he's not that cool. And like all this stuff because at some level social media has tricked the executives into caring about that for now. I think that's going to go away now. But I think you're right. And also, just a quick note, you're telling me that an Aaron Sorkin script isn't all that interested in women's perspective, Parker? You're telling me that Aaron Sorkin actually maybe doesn't always write women super well?
I'm the first person to ever float that concept, actually. Nobody else has ever made this
since
claim.
You're introducing this for the first time, might I ask, would you also introduce the idea that oftentimes, even though women get to play in the banter of Aaron Sorkin scripts, they often have to ultimately bow down to the cool guy who's ultimately a lot more charming than they are?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You know, I think it's a bold take of me to claim that, but to say such a thing. But I think I stand by it.
To claim that Aaron Sorkin really likes a great man, and the women is bold, Parker, very bold.
Hey, you know what? I come out swinging. I've got the hottest.
I do appreciate you pointing out that this is a product of its time, and I do think you're right that this movie would look a lot different if it was made today. To this movie's credit, I will say, like as we were talking about, of the genre being thriller and the Reznor Ross score feeling like someone's about to die.
Yeah.
That has only aged better and gives this movie a prescient, haunted feeling of like, how did you guys know? Like, how did you know that what the origins of Facebook really should be is feel like the creation of, like, it feels like Oppenheimer.
Yeah, like
right?
the moment it jumps to Europe, the moment the Winklevi are at the race and like the guy's like, oh yeah, my daughter to Cambridge, like that feels like the plague spreading now. Like it feels like the tendrils of something evil has gotten across the Atlantic.
Even the way that like the Winklevi are like, you have Facebook. You have Facebook at Oxford, and he's like, and the other colleges too, her friends are, and it's like, no.
Yeah.
I do honestly, now that I think about it, if this movie were made today, would it just be Oppenheimer? Would they try to put some sort of conscience on one of the characters? Not Zuckerberg, but
I was like, it couldn't be Zuckerberg, but maybe one of the other characters. If it was made today,
the framing device would be like the Senate hearings.
Yeah.
Like it would map really well onto that, genuinely.
Totally. 100%. Like it's something like I think about that a lot of, do you think that Sorkin just lies awake at night just kicking himself that he's like, man, if I had written this after the Senate hearings, I could have gone crazy. Like that framing device.
The government?
Yeah.
He loves a hearing. He loves
a hearing.
He loves a trial. Process. Yeah. Let's talk about the Winklevoss twins. Army Hammer. Womp womp.
Womp womp.
Unfortunate. Kevin Spacey was a producer on an Army Hammer movie? Oh, no.
Yike.
He is unfortunately very good in this.
Yeah, I do like him.
And
I
really
like
enjoy him in this, unfortunately.
Their scenes have, I think, some of my favorite, like, jokes in the movie. Like, I love, Freaking, you thought he'd be the only one who thought it was stupid?
Yeah, that's so good. I
That's great.
Really laughed hard at the because I don't want us to look like guys in skeleton costumes chasing after the Karate Kid. Like, I think that's really funny.
That one's really good.
The line of, I don't need someone to beat him up. I'm 6'2".
I'm 6'5", 220. There's two of me.
There's two of me. Unfortunately, I mean, like, yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just fun. Like it's just fun to see those guys react. Their scene with the president of Harvard of like, it's about, and he's like, I don't care. Get out of here. Like, what are you talking about?
I'm devastated by that. It's so good.
It's really good. This movie is really fun. As much as we're talking
really
about
fun.
The foreboding sense of it,
sure,
and how now it feels like you're watching the plague spread.
That's something I do forget that every time in between rewatches of like the movie has a sense of humor and has a lot of jokes and like just silly moments. One of my favorites is just at Caribbean Night when Eduardo spots Mark across the room. He just like this dance, this like shimmy as he walks up to him. It's fun. They're having a good time.
They're having a good time. Let's see. I feel like I took note of something. Oh, okay. There's the line, moving ahead a little bit. We're just playing fast and loose with the social network.
It's the Social Network.
What, we're going to go through each scene. It's well written. Wow, there's funny lines. The performances are all great.
Crazy.
Oh, wow. But the moment that always gets me is when Eduardo comes back to the dorm and Mark is like, hey, I need like $200 or $2,000 more from the account or whatever. And it's the night that Eduardo's like, I got punched in, so he's feeling really high on himself. And the way he goes, do it. Yeah. And then Mark's like, I already did it. And like that kind of taking the air out of Eduardo gets me every time, because the way Andrew Garfield plays it is so like, he feels like he gets to do something. Like he's like, he's saying like he
gets to be the cool guy.
He gets to be the cool guy. He goes, do it. Like he doesn't do that, but he like does like this little smirk. And like just the way that Mark sucks the air out of him by just going, I already did. Gets me every time. Again, the puppy dog nature of Garfield's performance in this movie is unreal. You're just like oh. Even though
that is
ultimately the thing that happens to him is he doesn't get to be as much of an unbelievably rich man. Yeah. But it's a testament to the performance and the writing of this that by the end you're like, he really screwed him over. And you're like, he's fine. He moved to Singapore,
it's like
rich,
feels like the like. It's so interesting to me that Sorkin felt the need to fabricate these moments of empathy for Mark, when in actuality, like, there's something drawn from real life history that they could have leaned on, and like it's there in the movie, and I'm surprised it's not the core, is just I was your only friend. Like that moment gets me every time, of just like that performance of like, you had nobody else. It was just me. Yeah. And you screwed me over. Like,
I mean, I'll say that the behind the scenes documentary, I think like the first thing is Eisenberg says it's really not about Facebook at all. And then Sorkin says, it's about friendship, jealousy, class, betrayal. And he says something along the lines of like, it's a story about things as old as storytelling itself, and that's what drew him to it. Eisenberg also says it's about modern ambition within this classical business world. Again, kind of like how it changes. Because again, it's still operating within the old way of how things worked. Yeah. And someone, I wish I'd noted who said this. I think maybe it was Eisenberg or maybe Garfield. But somebody says it's about two friends at its core. It's about what breaks their friendship. Like, ultimately, that's what the core of the movie is about, a friendship falling apart. So I think you're right that line of like, I was your only friend is really the core of it. Yeah. Does that come across to you?
Totally. I think so. It's just like, it's interesting to me that Sorkin felt the need to add stuff on top of that when that's already so strong, Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting. Yeah. I mean, Zuckerberg steals the website idea. The scene of Eduardo discovering the cease and desist letter is also just really, it's not as like fun and punchy. I don't think it gets shared as much, but like the way they both play that of like is really good. I mean, like the scenes between those two.
Here's a random fun fact for you, which is that I've seen that scene in the movie more than anything else, which is just because there was a while there where when I needed to like level my audio properly to set the levels, I would just go to like, I was like, okay, I'll just use a professional movie and make sure my speakers are set to that. And that was just, I don't know why. It just like when I went looking for it, it was in my recommends. And then for like 2 years, it was just if I needed to level audio, I went to movie clips and I found that scene. And I was just like, all right, level the audio. All right, good, we're done. Yeah, so there's that fun fact. I've seen that scene a lot.
I can't believe that of all the scenes I was going to mention, I was like, this is one that doesn't get talked about a lot. And Burger's like, I've seen that a thousand times.
So many times.
That's wild. That was just on YouTube. So I guess
it was just on. Yeah,
I guess people.
Yeah, it was just out there.
Interesting. That's wild. What other scenes come to mind?
I really like. This is jumping forward a little bit, which I mean we're doing ostensibly this whole time, but like, it's interesting because I remember the first time I watched this movie, it felt like the things I was taking away from it had a lot to do with like, again, the 2010s had this aura, especially like the first half of the 2010s in Hollywood of, and ironically enough, Eisenberg plays both, but like the leading man of the 2010s was Eisenberg's character in Now You See Me, of like always be the smartest guy in the room. Like he's a nerd, but he's intellectual. He's,
I think
it's the reason BBC Sherlock took off.
I was about to say, I think it's a result of Downey Jr. Iron Man.
Yeah.
And Cumberbatch Sherlock.
Totally.
And kind of, I mean, it's kind of like the late 2000s geek chic movement. It's why the Big Bang Theory exists.
Yeah.
It's why I think David Tennant in Doctor Who is a big reason it happened as well. Like there was just kind of this swing in culture of like, actually the coolest, hottest thing you can do as a man is be the smartest guy in the room. Yeah.
And it feels like when I was watching this first few times when I was younger, it did feel like the things that were standing out to me were the like, your clients can stand on my shoulders and call themselves talls if they want to give it a try. Like, that whole thing of like, did I sufficiently answer your condescending question? Like that, all of that stuff, you know? What are you saying?
Oh, it's very exact. It's exactly what you're talking about. I hadn't thought about this, but you're so right.
Yeah.
That like these lines are like quintessential early 2010s. Like, I'm shutting down your argument.
Totally.
And unfortunately, I think it's. Oh man, did that create Ben Shapiro as well?
It
Is
might
that
have.
what he's doing?
It might have.
That's what he's doing.
Very much. He's doing that. 100% he's doing that.
Oh.
Which is interesting because like the movie and my perception of the movie when I was younger is orbiting around that stuff, right? And the scene that I think is now like the cornerstone, the load-bearing scene of the movie in our current context is when he confronts Erica at the club.
Yes.
And she takes him down. And like that was, I wrote the quote down because I just love it so much. You write your snide bullshit from a dark room because that's what the angry do nowadays.
Yeah.
And like she just does like, it's like her affectation is how all of us are feeling right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, you and I are in the middle of getting ready for production on a short film, and that's the only reason I've been using social media, and I've told you candidly, I'm like, hey, as soon as this is done, I'm deleting Instagram and Facebook. Like I'm had it. I'm done, right?
Yeah.
And I think like her entire attitude was like, well, have you heard about the Facebook? She's like, no. I don't know what you're talking about.
Game.
How about your video game? You know?
Yeah.
Like it feels like now that scene is how the rest of us feel about this.
That's now the scene where you go, hell yeah, take him down.
Hell yeah. Mm-hmm.
Instead of how it used to be, where we used to be like, yeah, Zuckerberg, take down these jocks. It's
totally.
Like, yeah, that's a very interesting point. I also wanted to highlight the pratfall that the Winklevoss's friend does when he sees that Facebook exists is really good, where he just collapses over the chairs. It's really funny.
That's really good. I also like his reaction when Cameron finally is like, let's gut the freaking nerd. He just like shoots his hands up into the air silently. He's like, whoop.
That always is funny. Michael Shannon does that in Knives Out as well, when he's just like...
Very, very good. All the time.
Funny motion.
Good funny motion.
Yeah, there's so much that happens in the first half of this movie.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Let's say, what's the scene? I mean, Bill Gates scene is good.
That's another like that, and everybody like the people hit on, as they should, like the button of the scene of him being like, I could have sworn he was pointing at you when he said the next Bill Gates. You know, I came in led. I don't know who it was talking. It's Bill Gates.
Yeah,
that would make
that
sense.
makes sense.
And like that's funny. But I feel like we don't give enough to like the fact that the camera lingers on these three guys after Eduardo and Mark leave, and it's just like, I wish I had a Glock so I could shoot you right now. that line goes underappreciated.
It does. It really does. Yeah. I do want to talk about the chicken. I want to talk about how I think that when Zuckerberg is confronting Eduardo about it, he's like, this isn't going to be good for Facebook. Mm-hmm. And before the later thing where Eduardo is like, I knew you did it. You framed me or whatever. You put that on paper. But even before that, you get the sense that that's what's happened. Mm-hmm. Is that he planted the story. And that moment feels the most Kane-like to me. It feels like Kane sitting down to finish what's his name's review. Like, it feels like... Leland, thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Don't know why I know that.
World's biggest fan of Citizen Kane, Barker Rawlins.
I hate that I know that.
You've taught that movie so many times. Of course you know that.
It does. It feels very Kane-like. I think that's a great comparison.
We get Brenda Song in the movie.
I think she's really good. I think she does a good job with what she's given. You know?
Yeah, I think she's a fun presence. We get Justin Timberlake and Dakota Johnson when they first.
Is this like Dakota Johnson's like first?
It is. I think it is. Yeah.
Wow.
She's good. She's good in her scene for what it is. Again, Sorkin woman. Yeah. But I do really like Timberlake's performance as Sean Parker. I think he plays him enough as like swaggery, but also like sleazy. Mm-hmm. Like, you buy him in this world.
Totally.
I really buy into him. And I think the worst thing that performance could have done is that he just stands out like a sore thumb and he doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I do think he really works in it. I think the score goes hard during the Sean Parker sequence thing. And like the way that Eduardo in the deposition is recounting things as well. I think that really works, is cutting between the deposition.
That intercutting's really good.
Where they choose to cut Garfield's line and just have the scene show up and then return, I think is just like choice editing. Like, I think it really works.
It's like it's one of those things of this is going to be a bold claim, but I'm used to making those. I do genuinely feel that like there is a very specific kind of frame perfect editing in that sequence that is on par with like the match cut in Lawrence of Arabia. I love just watching it's the moment and the music's building up and building up. He's like, you know what's cooler than $1 million? You. And it cuts to Sean Parker and his lips start forming the B. And as he says it, we cut to Andrew Garfield back in the deposition. What $1 billion. Like, that is some god tier, like frame perfect editing in that moment.
Yeah. Who edited this, by the way? Let's see. Angus Wall and Kirk Baxter. Shout out to those guys.
All right. Shout out, guys.
Because I think you're absolutely right. It's really great. And again, like it's one of the most famous lines from The Thing, but like just Facebook, it's cleaner. Yeah. Also, my nephew is here, so if you hear a baby crying in the distance, it's my nephew. I don't. Just felt like I should put that out there for listeners if my mic picks it up. But like it's cleaner, and then especially for me, what really makes that is Zuckerberg going, shit. Like the way that Eisenberg delivers it of course, like why didn't I think of that? I think is really fun. They moved to Palo Alto. We get a lot of Eduardo, trying to set up advertising. Also just wild to have Mark Zuckerberg be like, no ads. It needs to be cool. We're cool right now. We don't know what it's going to become. And I go, it's going to become a hellscape of content, dude. Yeah. So good luck with that.
It's so funny hearing them have those conversations about like, it's time to start monetizing the site. It's like, no ads. It's like, yes, the alternative was just selling user data. That's what we landed on to make money. Thanks, Mark.
And then also... your feed just becoming the worst
just
nonsense of all
everywhere. Also, you mentioning Palo Alto, I just want to do a quick shout out of somebody who gets lost in the mix a little bit. I really love Joseph Mazzello in this. Tim from Jurassic Park. I think he's great. Like, I think he just, like, to the point that I kept thinking, it's a striking resemblance, or I guess this guy has a striking resemblance to him. Joseph Quinn, is that the guy's name?
Yes, yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah,
he's got there's a bit of that going on, but yeah, I think he's great. I really like his character, and like he keeps getting name dropped. Like, he has a pretty substantial amount of shares in all of this, but like is not one of the major key players. He's just always kind of there.
You really do get the sense that he's just there, and he's just kind of along for the ride, which I think is perfect. Of just these guys who got lucky. So yeah, they moved to Palo Alto. Eisenberg said this really interesting thing in the documentary where he talks about how that scene really stressed him out because originally in the script, Zuckerberg was supposed to be up on the roof and like doing these things, and he's like, I just couldn't crack how Zuckerberg would ever allow himself to have fun or be able to have fun. Like, Eisenberg's take on this character is that he is not human.
He's just miserable.
He's like, I just couldn't crack how he would do that, so I was relieved when he was just standing there filming. And they show this really interesting behind-the-scenes clip of Fincher and Eisenberg talking about it, and Fincher's like, it's gonna be, like, this is the closest you can get to having fun, or something along those lines. And Eisenberg's like, okay, yeah, like, for later. He's like, yeah, but also just, this is what you can do. And I think that's really interesting.
Really good.
Again, it kind of cementing Zuckerberg as just the guy who can his only access to socializing is through a screen and from a distance and watching other people, right?
Yeah. Another little weird thing in this sequence with the rental house, I'm curious to see if they said anything about the documentary. So there's the moment when Sean Parker shows up. He's like, Jimmy, like all this stuff, right? And the girl he's with, Mark throws a beer to her and it just hits the wall and shatters, right? And then he does it again, and when he does it again, it explodes in midair. Did you notice that? It doesn't hit a wall. It just like it's like her POV basically. He throws it and it explodes in front of the camera.
I didn't. I know what you're talking about. They didn't talk about it at all.
Like, what is that? I just really picked up on it this time.
I guess I always thought it like hit the like a door or a
no,
chair
it doesn't
back
hit
or something.
anything. It just explodes in midair, and I'm like, what did it hit? Because the first one is like in a wide and it clearly hits the wall, but then it basically again cuts to like her POV and he almost throws it like at camera, and then it just explodes once it gets out of frame and you see the glass go, and I'm like, that's so strange.
I think it's so weird how Sean Parker introduces this woman. He's like, this is my Sharon. She's moving. I'm helping her move. And again, later we learn he's like so it's kind of like, who is this? But then also I looked up that actress, and she's in Time with him later, but in like a small role. And so I'm kind of like, I don't know. I always think it's interesting when someone's in a movie with somebody else and then they just show up in the next one.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. So then Winklevoss twins, again, we mentioned they discover that Facebook has expanded to Europe. They agree to sue the company for intellectual property theft. Go ahead.
This segment has my other kind of slight ding on the movie, is that I think the Winklevi disappear from the movie after this.
They do.
And I don't know why. Like, it feels very strange to me. And I understand that, like, we've caught up to the present day.
We've caught up to them suing him, and then we have the deposition, right?
Sure. And I get that it feels odd that we're now cutting one of the three legs out of the movie for the last, it's like the last, 25 minutes. Like, they just disappear, and they don't get, like, the last mention they get is in the text blurb at the end. Yeah. And it just feels, I don't know why it caught me this time specifically. I was just like, where did that pillar of the movie go?
I see what you're saying. It does kind of feel like the movie is just kind of like, I mean, that's kind of it for them. And it's kind of weird. You're right that it's just not spread out in a way where, like, even if we cut to their deposition another time,
like even just like better, if we just had like an insert shot of like Mark getting served papers or something, like it feels weird that like we have, let's gut the friggin' nerd, and we don't see like, and like we can gather from context that gutting the friggin' nerd is the deposition, but we don't see a payoff to that line. They just disappear. I
think pretty soon after that we do get him kind of resolve, like that deposition storyline ends as well, right around that same time of like they go back to him and he kind of demolishes them of like, I can't remember what his last line to them is, but he says his last big thing to them, and then it's kind of like, whatever.
Yeah.
I agree. I see what you're saying. I also just am like, I guess like maybe for the third act, they're like, let's really just focus in on the Eduardo
No, and it makes
stuff.
sense. It's just it's odd that they just drop it the way they do.
I do agree. I agree because
Yeah.
there isn't like that connecting piece of like we move from let's gut him to the deposition.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say that the In the Hall of the Mountain King thing has aged the worst out of everything in this movie.
It has.
That is the least interesting piece of music in the movie.
Yeah.
I understand why it's there, and also I do like them losing at the 2004 regatta for Harvard.
Yeah.
Like I do think that is interesting to like tie that into they're losing everything.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. I just think that piece
The
feels
sequel,
the
yeah.
most 2010.
Yeah, the
like,
music feels 2010, like the weird GoPro vignette,
Yes.
a hyperfish lens,
Yeah.
like it's, I agree. Like that
feels-
sequence feels out of place now.
It feels really out of place now. And I would say is like the only part of this that really dates the movie. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's operating so much within the early 2000s. I think it feels very accurate to the time. Like everything works. It's just that
Totally.
one scene where this time watching
Yeah.
it, I was like, "All right, guys," because the rest of the score also feels very. I mean, they're doing a similar sound for Challengers as well.
Yeah.
And that's like the one piece where I just go, this feels like Skrillex is popular, like that's kind of how it feels.
Totally.
But
I agree.
it's their first film score together. I mean, they got to have a little dud in there, maybe trying something, I should say.
Yeah.
Eduardo arriving at the house in Palo Alto. Sean's there. Again, just wet. He's just drenched from rain, just looking like the saddest guy who's ever lived. He was waiting for hours at the airport. Bummer. I think what is really effective is I really just start to loathe Sean Parker in this movie. I do think that it works. Justin Timberlake in the documentary describes his character as the mistress of sorts, and I go, yeah.
It's interesting too that Zuckerberg has been pretty vocally against this movie and being like, it's a work of fiction, none of this happened. But again, by the nature of what Sorkin is trying to achieve, he has some wiggle room. This movie goes after Sean Parker. This movie hates this guy.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd done a bit of more research on his reaction to the movie, but I can't imagine it was very favorable.
No. I think he did get the ending of this did happen.
Yeah.
But I think that he still remained as a higher up at Facebook, even through all of the stuff that came after that. Eduardo freezes the account for the company. Brenda Song lights that scarf on fire and leaves him. He returns, and this is where the movie really kicks into a new gear, and it just flies to the end, in my opinion, of it's the scene, the audio trended on TikTok, but him arriving at Facebook's new offices through, he's plugged in. Sorry? He's plugged in. Okay. Seeing behind the scenes, they had 40 laptops for him to smash.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And again, it really just, this scene of, my Prada's at the cleaners. One with my fuck you flip-flops, you pretentious douchebag. It's just kind of gold. It's just kind of gold. Do you have anything of note to say about this?
No, it's everybody's firing on all cylinders. It's great. The button at the end is so good. I love standing next to you, Sean. Makes me look so tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. Because also, that's such a... Sean Parker in this movie. When he's like, this is a check for $19,000. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend you cash it, though. It's from the account that you froze. Just that, up tilt at the end.
Yeah.
Awful. It's just good. And you already called out Zuckerberg being you were a little too hard on him, Sean.
Yeah.
Fascinating. It's just
and it's one of those things of, I think it works here. I really don't have any problems with it. It is fascinating to me that Sorkin is known for being somebody who is so methodical in his writing, and I do find it interesting that it's pretty heavy-handed how many times Eduardo brings up how old are they. Like, they bring up the age thing over and over and over again to, like, really just, like, pound this home. It's like, this is where this train is careening towards, and we all know it. Like, this foreshadowing is not subtle in the slightest.
Yeah. Okay, so as a Guyfall movie, is this more of a Sean Parker Guyfall movie? Because Zuckerberg ends up, in a sense, in like a, I suppose in a financial and physical sense, but also Zuckerberg ends with 0 friends.
I was gonna say it's still. I think it's still Zuckerberg's Guyfall movie in the same way that it's a Kane-esque Guyfall of dude has everything in the world, like everything has gone his way except he is alone and miserable.
It is interesting that because Erica Albright is entirely fictional, she is the rosebud of this movie.
Yeah.
Except that they just show us at the very beginning Erica Albright, and then at the end, kind of his final word in the film is just refreshing a friend request.
Yeah.
Which I just really like that as just like, God, this guy. Like, he doesn't let anything go.
And I really, we brushed over it, but like a scene I do really love is him and Sean Parker in the club. And he's like, do you ever think about that girl? He's like, he's like, no, not at all. And you just see him kind of like deflate and be like, well, I think about Erica all the time.
Yeah. That scene's also really fun because I do love how real they play it with the dialogue of the club is so much louder than the dialogue, and I just think it's really fun. I think it works. Is there anything else before we get to the ending? We already talked about it a little bit, but Sean he's at a party, he's doing coke, underage girls. He goes to jail, and Mark Zuckerberg's like,
I'll take care of it.
I'll take care of it. I'm CEO, bitch. It's very, again, just it feels like this is the creation of a lot of that 2010s attitude of like
totally.
Yeah. Depositions wrap up. Did we miss any scenes? Anything new? I mean, when he brings the interns on, it's kind of fun with the drinking game. I refuse to believe that there would be a room of people screaming and chanting over computer screens they can't see.
Again, it is the sexification of coding.
It is. I mean, it works in the movie.
Sure.
I just am like, I'm not. I shouldn't have even said it. I feel like cinema sins now. But yeah. I mean, the ending we had kind of talked about already.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the summary.
Network.
I think we've talked about our thoughts on it. Criteria.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Technical and historical relevance.
Well, let's see here. The film premiere. just read all the summary. I mean, it was a huge success, which doesn't always mean anything, but it was named one of the best films of the year by 78 critics and named the best by 22. Nice. It was also chosen by the National Board of Review as the best film of 2010. It received 8 nominations at the Academy Awards and won for Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score, and Best Film Editing. It also received awards at the Golden Globes. It's maintained a strong reputation. It is commonly ranked by critics as one of the best films of the 2010s and the 21st century. The WGA ranked Sorkin's screenplay the 3rd greatest of the 21st century. So that is a good script.
Okay, interesting.
Factual accuracy is, however, largely contested. Whatever.
Sure.
Whatever. This is based on a book. It's based on a book by a guy who basically writes books to get them made into movies.
Yeah, his entire career.
It's his whole thing. Yeah. I think that the book being called The Accidental Billionaires tells you everything about where the movie's angle is. Again, at the time when it was made, it still feels like it was like seeing it as, isn't it wild that these young guys became billionaires?
Yeah.
And then like 5 years after this, it's like, Mark Zuckerberg owns us now.
Yeah.
He controls us now. He controls how we talk to each other. Meta, sorry, if we're going to be real. In 2024, it was selected for the Film Registry, National Film Registry, as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So, National Film Registry says it is significant historically.
Sure.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I think this movie coming out in 2010 kind of as you mentioned, kind of opens the door for a lot of characters that continue throughout the decade of like smart guy in the room. I think that it I think Fincher generally contributes a lot to how a lot of movies look as the decade progresses.
Yeah.
And this kind of cements it. Obviously, this movie before this was Benjamin Button, which doesn't look like this. You could argue Zodiac is the first time, since that's like fully digital, looks like film. But I'm willing to give this movie a lot of credit for just kind of setting the tone for a decade, in a sense. Yeah. Do I have any evidence of that? Not really. But what do you think?
I would agree. I think you make a lot of strong points there. Now, is it more technically or historically relevant than Citizen Kane? That's the question.
That is the question. I would just like to... No, this will be for the second criteria. Is it more... I think similar to There Will Be Blood, I think it is... I think this movie and There Will Be Blood, which we talked about last year, I think together they feel so much like where Kane sits.
Yeah.
And yet... I don't know. I don't know if this is as influential. I mean, it's influential in fan fiction circles.
Sure. I think there are other places that we can, hang laurels on this film. I think I'm okay with giving the point to Kane.
Okay. I'm good with that.
All right.
Okay. How is this film doing what it's trying to do? Real quick, I would just like to talk a little bit more about what it's trying to do.
Okay.
Obviously, earlier I mentioned how the cast and crew... there's no interview with Fincher in the behind-the-scenes documentary, which is fine and makes sense. But they kind of talk about how, it's not really about Facebook, it's about this friendship, it's about betrayal, it's kind of this classic story told in the modern setting. And I did just want to say... there was this really... Okay, yeah, so real quick... there's an interview from timeout.com with Fincher in 2011, and they asked him, do you think it matters that Zuckerberg is not an easy character to take a shine to? And he says, look, I'm not an obsequious studio development assistant. A lot of times people like characters who need to be loved or liked. I like those characters. I like Jake LaMotta. I like Travis Bickle. I even like Rupert Pupkin. I like characters who don't change, who don't learn from their mistakes. Charles Foster Kane was a spoiled, rotten 8-year-old with a sled. He became a spoiled, rotten 76-year-old who may or may not have figured it all out in his last moments on Earth. But he doesn't change. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then also... okay, sorry. I really should have brought this up before we dived into criteria. There's this other thing where Time Out says, the film has been launched in a very smart wave of marketing. And Fincher says, yes, but my problem with the ad campaign is that you can't just say punk genius billionaire because it's using that narcissistic MTV flash to get kids interested. I wanted to include Judas or traitor because you've got to have a bad word in there. Punk genius billionaire is basically a giant blowjob. So yeah. I like that he's like, I think this reads to me as he's like, I'm not trying to lift Zuckerberg up as this really cool guy. Yeah. He's like, he's also a Judas, he's a traitor. I think that's interesting. Specifically here at the end of the interview, they say the film has been attracting nods to great works of film and literature and cinema, such as Macbeth, The Great Gatsby, Citizen Kane. Were you even considering any of the references with which you've been praised? And he said, somebody asked me what my intent was with this movie, and I said very facetiously that I wanted to make the Citizen Kane of John Hughes movies. Which I think is interesting. We're talking about a coming-of-age movie that is also a reflection on the last 4 years of a 26-year-old's life. That's the ludicrousness of the information age. Something I think of is that a day in the life of a blue whale is different from the day in the life of a fruit fly. And I just think that's very interesting. I thought those were interesting points to kind of key us into what is Fincher trying to do. Because we already touched on this. This movie does feel a little split. Not necessarily, again, it's not like it's at war with itself.
Sure.
But Sorkin and Fincher do have these slightly differing views. Almost like, what would it even be? It's almost like having different vision in each lens of your glasses. Of like, Sorkin's like, it's kind of this. It's a little rose-tinted maybe. And Fincher's like, yeah, it's a thriller. It's about this guy that I think ultimately betrays his friend. And I think that's interesting. That all being said, how well do you think this movie's doing what it's trying to do?
You know, what it's trying to do, I think it's doing pretty well. Like across the board. I think, you know, it's there are things about the way the movie is aged that are outside of the movie's control. But what it's trying to achieve, I think it does well.
Yeah. For sure. I agree.
What about you?
I think the movie really works for me. I think that it gets across kind of the strange alien nature of it feels like it's exploring who is the guy that would create this and why.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it makes a very strong argument for this version of Zuckerberg. Do I think it's
Totally.
entirely realistic? No. Because he doesn't smoke any meats in the movie. That's why I want a sequel to this, so I can watch Mark Zuckerberg smoke meats while he goes to court.
Oh, sure.
While he goes to
Why
the
not?
Supreme Court or Congress. Mr. Zuckerberg goes to Washington, am I right? No. Anyway, whatever. I think the movie's doing what it's trying to do very well. And I do think, call it recency bias, call it's the 21st century version of a similar story.
Yeah.
I would say it's doing it better than Kane. Potentially. I think they're very even.
Yeah.
But
I would say
think
so as
this
well.
I think this edges it out just a little bit. And
I
that
get
can
behind
just be up to it came out in 2010 and it affects me directly because hey,
Sure.
my brain got poisoned by this guy too. Okay, so point to Social Network.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and do you like this film?
I do, quite a bit.
Yeah, me too.
Like,
Every time I watch it, I go, "Oh, I could like watch this more often."
Yeah, it's very
Like,
entertaining, for sure.
It's an easy watch, I would say.
Yeah.
It's entertaining.
I agree.
I do like it. Okay, taking a step back, Parker. What do you think?
You know, if I'm just doing, you know, if I'm focusing in on the things that I like to talk about a lot on this show, I think it is better. I think it is a Kane-like narrative of a guy fall that, whether through fabrication or not, gets me to feel something for the main character in a way that I just don't care about Charlie, and I don't think I ever will care about Charlie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what this show is about. It's Will Parker. That's the will they won't they of this show.
Yeah.
Is
Will
Will
Parker
Parker
ever love
ever-
Citizen Kane? Look, I like Citizen Kane.
No,
Love is a stretch.
To be fair, I was going to say, will Parker ever find Charles Foster Kane interesting?
It's going to be a very tough sell. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think this is an interesting take on a similar story. I think what this kind of the most obvious difference here is that we're closer to Mark than we are to Kane.
Yeah.
It feels more like we're seeing things through his eyes, whereas Kane, again, we've gone over this. It literally can't. He's dead.
Yeah. Right.
The whole point of the movie is the mystery of who was he.
Sure.
Would you like to see if Fincher and Sorkin reunited for some sort of follow up to this? Would you be interested in that at all?
No.
Yeah.
Like not
neither.
like just me personally, like
Yeah.
I can't imagine anything they would have to say about this that hasn't already been said.
Yeah, that's true.
And I just think it is a lot tougher sell to do a movie about a tech billionaire now.
Yeah, it is. It's true.
You know?
Everyone just go watch Glass Onion instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would, yeah. Absolutely. Well,
All right.
shall we?
Do you want to say it?
Yeah. The Social Network is better than Citizen Kane.
All right. It's okay. Relax.
No,
Breathe.
It goes down rough. You need a glass of water to wash that down. Why is it hard now?
I don't know.
understand.
I don't know why it's gotten so hard for you.
I don't understand. It's not like I really like Citizen Kane now. I just respect it more. But it's not like I'm like,
Sure.
it's now my favorite movie.
Yeah.
It's a complicated arc I'm on. You're one of those rare characters with no arc, and people, you're a real Marty McFly situation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I am stuck in my ways.
He should have an arc. Anyway, Parker, next time, we actually don't know what movie we're having next time. Ideally, next time we'll be having another guest, our dear friend Josie Hartley.
Yes.
I'm excited to see what she brings. If that falls through for whatever reason,
We'll have a
I
backup.
think it's the Princess Bride would be the backup. But
Okay.
if not, then it is Josie's pick, and then The Princess Bride. So there's something for people to look forward to.
There you go. You got a nice little sneak peek.
It's wild we're already there. Okay.
Yeah, we're cruising along.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.